That morning carried the kind of Chicago cold that shattered your breath into thin shards of mist. I stood outside Harborline's glass entrance, gripping a cup of steaming coffee as I braced myself for another day inside the Caldera system. For 10 years, my mornings never changed. I arrived early, walked through the turnstiles, listened to the familiar beep of the badge scanner, and greeted the security guard who knew my routine so well he could have mapped my schedule better than my own watch. But that morning, something snapped clean through a decade of predictability. I was waiting in the thin line of employees moving toward the turnstiles when a young woman appeared out of nowhere at the main doors. She did not slow down, did not reach for a badge, did not look at security. She just walked straight in. An even stranger, Martin Holloway, our chief executive officer, was standing there waiting for her the way someone would wait for a state guest. He smiled in a way I had never seen before, a smile that made it clear she was not a new hire and not an interview candidate. She was someone different. I had spent a full decade in an environment where everything needed to be verified 3 times. The Caldera payment system I built for Harborline ran with the discipline of a military engine. Every dollar traveling along its invisible rails had to be logged, cross-checked, and authenticated. Yet this girl passed through the turnstiles like a breeze slipping past steel, untouched by rules or resistance. It went against every logic I trusted. I walked into the main lobby, our so-called security fortress. A few employees were badging in, the steady beep echoing through the hall like the building's heartbeat. The warm lights reflected across the marble floor, a sight I saw every day, but somehow noticed differently that morning. Maybe because her presence made the familiar feel unfamiliar. She wore white sneakers so clean, I wondered if she had walked from the parking lot at all. A light bomber jacket, her hair tied up, phone held in front of her as she recorded herself. I caught fragments of her voice. Day in my life, first day shadowing at Harborline. Enough to realize she was live streaming. Something my generation would never imagine doing inside a place as strict as Harborline. Then she called the chief executive officer by a name only his family would dare use, Uncle Marty. I had worked with Martin for years and never called him anything but Mr. Holloway. He never let anyone call him by that family nickname. Yet she said it lightly, the way you call an uncle across a weekend dinner. I paused for a beat, feeling my coffee grow heavier in my hand. This was a building where even a new maintenance worker had to clear 2 rounds of identity checks. And she simply walked in. No questions, no protocol, no hesitation from anyone around her. I tried to label the moment as something harmless, maybe a pre-approved visitor, maybe a special guest. But the instinct that kept me alive more than once back in the Navy tapped hard behind my sternum. A small rattle in a ship's engine room. Small, but never harmless. I have always been a person who lives by order. I am not good at corporate small talk or climbing the political ladder. I know my place, both in the company and in life. I work best in front of a screen, analyzing transaction flows, building protection models, and keeping Caldera moving smoothly. In the world of systems, everything has a reason. Everything has rules. No one bypasses a checkpoint simply because they know someone. But that morning, I watched the first rule bend in total silence. Martin reached toward her and said something I could not hear. She laughed, brushed her hair back, and said a line with the excitement of someone unwrapping a holiday gift. I only caught a piece of it. Show them how Generation Z does things. That line hit me like a cold wave. In that moment, I did not know who she was, why she was here, or what kind of storm she was carrying with her. But I knew one thing. When a system built on discipline and caution is treated like a red carpet, nothing good follows. I stepped into the elevator and tried to push the uneasy feeling down. But instinct never takes orders. It whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Some storms announce themselves long before the sky changes, sometimes through an unexpected chill. A cloud sitting in the wrong place. Or, in this case, a young woman who walked through Harborline's turnstiles without a badge. As the elevator doors closed, I knew with absolute clarity that this day would not be like any other. Something was moving toward us, not loud, not obvious, just a silent alarm. Only people who have lived through real chaos know how to recognize it. A signal that the order we trusted was about to twist upside down, and the first person to feel it was the one standing quiet in the lobby with a hot cup of coffee. If you are hearing this part of the story, I would love to know where you are listening from, which city you are in, or what quiet corner of the world you are sitting in. Leave the place you are in so I can picture which time zone this story is set in. I thought watching Riley walk through the turnstiles without a badge would be the strangest thing I saw that day. I was wrong. About an hour later, an email appeared in the corner of my screen, a single line that made my heartbeat slow by half. Meeting immediate, 27th floor. No subject. Meetings without a subject line rarely signal anything good. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. The keyboards outside kept clicking in their steady rhythm, and the coffee machine down the hall released its usual beeps. The quieter it was, the sharper that indescribable feeling became. I locked my workstation, stood up, and walked out like a soldier following orders. Even though I knew those orders were not leading to anything good, the elevator ride to the 27th floor was so smooth it barely felt real, as if the building wanted me delivered quickly, cleanly, without friction. I rarely came to this floor. It smelled different. Less like plastic from machines, more like polished wood and expensive perfume. Thick carpet underfoot. Abstract paintings on the walls, the kind I never understood. The meeting room sat in the corner, its glass wall overlooking the Chicago River drifting heavily beneath patches of broken ice. I stood at the door for a single second that felt longer. Then I opened it and walked in. 3 people were already there. Martin Holloway sat at the head of the table. His posture had not changed since any meeting before. Back straight like steel, hands interlocked, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. He did not look up when I entered. I could not tell whether it was habit or intention, but it created distance without a single word. To his right was Claire Donovan, head of human resources. She looked at me with eyes trained never to reveal too much. A perfectly neutral expression. Cold enough, soft enough, never leaning to either side. I had seen that look from her during difficult meetings, and it never accompanied anything pleasant. Across from Claire sat Riley, the girl from the morning. She sat in the exact seat once used by the former chief technology officer. That detail was impossible to ignore. She leaned back slightly, the posture of someone waiting to begin her own presentation. An open tablet glowed in front of her, the light washing across a face carrying an effortless kind of confidence. The kind of person raised in a world where a camera is always on and the world is always watching. I pulled out a chair, sat, and nodded. No one met my eyes. Martin cleared his throat and spoke in a tone so even it sounded rehearsed. "Ethan, thank you for coming up so quickly," he said. This time he glanced my way, but the look disappeared instantly back toward the polished table. "You have been here a long time, longer than most people in this room. Caldera would not be what it is today without your dedication." I stayed silent. I knew this opener. It was the sugar coating. Martin continued. "But the brand is changing. Our customers are changing. Younger generations want to see themselves reflected in the technology they use. Caldera cannot remain a symbol of the old guard. It needs a new voice, a new face." He gestured toward Riley like he was unveiling a strategic product. She smiled and dipped her head, a movement clearly practiced from hundreds of online videos. Natural yet calculated. "The board believes Riley should lead Caldera into its next phase," Martin said plainly. "She has the mindset that aligns with our new direction." I looked straight at him. "Is this restructuring or termination?" Claire answered before Martin could, her voice smooth as a pre-recorded message. "Ethan, this is not about your performance. You have done excellently. But to align with the new vision, some positions must be adjusted." Adjusted. A word as pretty as placing a fresh label on food nearing expiration. Martin pulled a folder from beneath his hand and slid it toward me. "We have prepared a very competitive severance package," he said. 6 months' salary, health insurance for a period, and career transition support. I opened the folder. Everything was neat. Clean. Too clean. Until my eyes landed on the signature line. The third signature was not the chief technology officer. It was Omar Reyes. I froze. The ink was still dark, fresh, not the faded signature that had passed through countless approvals. This one was new, very new. Riley tilted her head, watching my reaction like she was viewing a viral clip. I closed the folder, stood up. I did not sign, I did not react. I simply thanked them and walked out. But I did not return to my desk. I turned instead toward the engineering wing and stopped in front of Omar's small office. I knocked lightly. No answer. I opened the door. Omar looked up, his face losing all color. Ethan, I was going to talk to you after the meeting, he stammered. You signed, did you not? Omar swallowed hard. They said if I did not, the whole department would be reviewed. They said I have 2 kids. I cannot risk it. I need this job. I looked at him for a long time, then said one sentence, soft but sharp enough to make him bow his head. You used to have a spine. I remember it. I walked away before he could say anything else. Back at my desk, I logged into the system. Several of my permissions were gone. When I opened the changelog, I saw the entry. My admin privileges had been downgraded by 4 levels 3 days earlier, modified by a generic management account with no name attached. They erased me from the system before they erased me from the building. A very clean process. I gathered a few things. On my way out, I tapped my badge against the door reader. The light flashed green. The system still thought I belonged. Only the people had decided otherwise. They deleted my account with a single command, but there was one thing they could not erase because I had never signed it. I left the Harbor Line building without looking back, not because I was stronger than anyone else, but because I knew that if I turned around in that moment, I might stop for one beat too long and lose the clarity I needed to keep walking. I headed toward my small apartment in River North, a place quiet enough to live, close enough to work, and far enough from the city noise to breathe. Thin snow fell across my shoulders, melting fast but leaving a cold trace through my coat. When I opened the door, the apartment was dark, the way it always was after I had been gone for hours. I switched on the kitchen light, hung my coat over a chair, and set the office box on the floor. I stared at it for a moment, thinking about how quickly it had been packed, as if it held fragments of a life someone had sliced in half. I did not open it. Not yet. I made a cup of hot tea and set my personal laptop on the table. Unlike the machines at work, this one was older, heavier, and not connected to any internal system. I kept it out of habit, the sort of habit a former service member never lets go of. Always have a device that is yours. Secure. Separate. I logged into my personal email archive. My fingers moved across the keyboard by muscle memory, steady and automatic. I knew exactly what I was looking for, even though I had not opened it in years. But today had forced open a door in my mind. A door Harbor Line should never have been left cracked open. I typed into the search bar the phrase IP transfer 2017. Within seconds, the email chain appeared. I remembered every part of it, but I still opened the first message. The date sat clearly in the corner, the year 2017. Caldera was in its final testing phase then. We barely slept, one bug after another, one alert after another, one afternoon lost among hundreds of technical emails. A lawyer sent me a document to sign. They said it was the final step before Caldera's official release. I opened that document. It required me to transfer all intellectual property rights related to Caldera or to Harbor Line. Not only the work I produced on the job, but also everything I had built before. Every idea, model, and early draft. The versions I wrote were while living off military stipends and working night shifts in a community lab. The document was too broad, too sweeping. It did not distinguish between company work and my personal work. No limits, no clear scope, no protection for authorship. I remembered replying to that email at 2 a.m, a short message, straight to the point, the way a soldier answers. I refused to sign until they revised the terms to protect the work I created outside the company. The next day, I received a response from a junior attorney on the legal team. Only one line. Without your signature, ownership may be disputed in the future. Then a second line. We will review and send an updated version. But they never sent it. Not because they agreed, because they were overwhelmed. Caldera had become the company's obsession. Everyone was scrambling to fix issues, run tests, and write reports. And in the chaos, someone forgot one crucial step. No one followed up. No one checked. And I did not bring it up again. I focused on keeping the system secure, not fighting over paperwork. Now I was staring at that same document, The PDF was still here, untouched, unedited. I scrolled to the end, to the signature line. The space beneath signature, Ethan Cole, was blank, clean, untouched. I sat there in silence. For 10 years, Harborline operated Caldera as if it legally belonged to them. The chief executive officer spoke about it as corporate property. Legal wrote reports as if everything had been formally executed. Riley live-streamed this morning as if she were the rightful heir to it. But that was not the truth. Caldera still carried my imprint. Not just in its code, but in a legal gap they believed had been sealed long ago. The system they had just stripped me out of was still running on a false assumption. That I had signed, that I had surrendered everything, that I had walked away from the very thing I built from its first breath. I downloaded the entire email chain, the PDF, and the correspondence history. I gathered them into a new folder on my desktop. I named the folder Quiet Debt, the debts people think are settled but were never paid. I hit save, then sat still, listening to the wall clock mark each second, slow and cold, exactly like time itself, a force no one can outrun. There was a second version of Caldera that they never knew about, not because I hid it, but because they never looked closely enough. That night, after closing the Quiet Debt folder on my laptop, I did not go to sleep. My mind was not spinning around, losing my bomb, or the meeting on the 27th floor, or Omar's signature. All of that mattered, but none of it was what kept me awake. What I kept thinking about was the rail line, the thing I had built for nearly a decade, the thing Harborline believed they controlled while standing on sand. I opened the laptop and logged into an interface I had not touched in almost 3 years. Not because I forgot it, because I never needed to use it anymore. But it was still there, sitting quietly under a harmless-looking folder. Silent Harbor, a name I came up with at 3 in the morning, back when the Japanese vendor was late sending a patch, and I needed a place to test without waiting. Silent Harbor was never a secret product. It was just a temporary test branch, completely isolated, with no write access, no ability to alter data, and not visible in the admin dashboard. A place where I could run logic without touching the real Caldera. In the year 2020, I created it during one quiet night. That was when Caldera was shifting from version 2 to version 3, a heavy upgrade. I remembered sitting in the server room under cold white lights, machines humming nonstop, my eyes burning from reading logs for hours. Silent Harbor was like placing a mirror next to the system, reflecting the entire architecture without disturbing it. And the funniest part was that no one in the company ever asked me what that code was for. Everyone was too busy. As long as the system ran, no one questioned why it ran. I typed the login command. The black screen lit up. Authentication appeared. I entered the password. A second later, Silent Harbor opened. It was still running, quiet, true to its name. No warning logs. There was no missing data flags. Running as if no one had touched it for years, because no one had. I leaned back in my chair. A feeling slipped into my chest, hard to label, not joy, not sadness, something like recognition. Harborline thought they had removed me from Caldera, but they forgot Caldera was never alone. I opened the live transaction observer. It did not change the data. Silent Harbor only watched and analyzed what Caldera was doing, and immediately I saw Riley's fingerprints and the fingerprints of her new team. They renamed modules, not minor edits, full replacements. The regional transaction processor was renamed to Pulse Engine. The real-time fraud filter is renamed to Gen Z Gate. There was nothing wrong with renaming for marketing, but they did not just rename. They removed layers of risk checks that my team and I had built over 3 years. They cut threshold warnings, disabled the entire audit logs just to make the demo run faster. Speed always impresses people who do not understand systems, but speed without control is a highway without guardrails. I scanned the logs. One section made me stop entirely. A young engineer who joined last year had left a comment on a branch. "We should not remove this check. It may cause allocation drift." Beneath it, the username Riley responded, "Do not worry, customers want a smooth experience. Legacy checks only slow things down. Legacy checks, The safeguards I built over 3 years to prevent supply distortion when a large vendor failed. They treated it like old clutter. I inhaled slowly, my hand resting on the keyboard. Not out of anger, out of regret. Young people like Riley are not malicious. They are simply too confident in fresh paint while forgetting the structure behind it. I opened the draft of the internal protection module I had written years ago, but never deployed because leadership said it was too sensitive. It had been designed only to detect admin abuse. Back then, I wrote it to guard against insider attacks. Now, it had a different purpose: to protect Caldera from the people who stripped me out and claimed the system as theirs. I adjusted the module. Only one condition: if Caldera's logic ran anywhere without a valid license tied to the name Ethan Cole, the system would stop processing transactions. Do not erase data, not corrupt anything, just stop. The way a main breaker flips when someone tries to steal power from a house. Silent Harbor could not write directly into Caldera, but it had access to the protection module buried inside the internal security layer. And ironically, that was the very layer Riley ignored while she was optimizing the admin interface. I began typing. No automated tools, no copying. I wanted every line simple, clean, leaving no unnecessary trace. 6 lines of code. 6. Everything was tight enough that anyone looking at it would assume it was just a routine safety check. Before hitting enter, I paused. 3 things I needed to be sure of. 1, nothing could touch anyone's money. 2, no hospital, emergency service, or relief organization could be affected. 3, I could not become a saboteur. I was only reclaiming what was mine. I checked the code. Once. Then again, the way I used to double-check every action in the military before executing a critical step. There was no room for error. I hit enter. The screen flickered. A small flicker, like an exhale. 6 seconds passed. Slow enough that I could hear the clock ticking in the living room. Then the confirmation appeared. Module updated. I leaned back. Not happy, not triumphant, not proud. Just the same feeling as locking your own front door when you leave the house. A routine act of someone who still owns the place. I had not planted a bomb. I had simply restored the main breaker in a house they were using without a contract. And the funniest part was this: they were so confident that they did not realize the key was still in my hand. Harborline sent me an email a little after 10 in the morning. 4 short words in the subject line. Access permanently revoked. No greeting, no explanation, no regret. A decision executed by a system with no human hand involved, yet heavier than anything said in the meeting on the 27th floor. I stared at the screen for a moment. Not angry, not surprised. After everything they had done, this was just the official confirmation of a choice they had made long before. I dismissed the notification, took a long breath, and was about to shut down my laptop when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. West Coast. I have never liked answering calls from numbers I do not recognize, especially on a day like this. But something made me swipe the screen and lift the phone to my ear. Ethan Cole, correct. A woman's voice. Low, clear, steady. Not the tone of human resource or marketing. The tone of someone familiar with decisions. This is me, I said. I am Laura Kim, Chief Technology Officer at Northbridge Systems. I am assuming you know who we are. Of course I knew. Northbridge was Harborline's biggest rival in payment infrastructure. The two companies had competed for a decade, sometimes openly, sometimes through performance benchmarks only people like me pay attention to. I stayed silent for a beat, then said, I know. Good, she continued. Word about your workforce transition spread this morning. News travels fast across engineering circles, you understand? Easy to understand. A senior architect was fired right after the chief executive officer's niece joined the company. Everyone knew it was an internal matter, but gossip moved faster than any official memo. Laura went on, calm but not cold. Northbridge is opening a newer project to build a next-generation payment platform. Something not tied down by legacy systems, not stitched together over 10 years. We want you to lead it. I leaned back in my chair. This was not the call I expected, but it was not something that surprised me either. I just did not think it would come this quickly. And if I say no, I asked, not to test her, but to hear her answer. She let out a quiet laugh. Then I will call again next week. and the week after. People who understand how money moves on the inside are rare, Ethan. People who can design the rails are even rarer. I glanced at the box on the floor, then at the email still open on my screen. Access permanently revoked. Nothing tied me to Harborline anymore. But that did not mean every invitation was worth accepting. I had been in the industry long enough to know competition between companies could be as dirty as politics. I asked directly, if I moved to Northbridge, what authority would I have? She did not hesitate for even half a beat. Full technical authority over the entire project. A flexible budget, no pressure to use half-baked frameworks, no approvals through 10 layers of management, and equity. Not the kind you parade in the press, the kind that gives you a real vote. I stayed quiet for several seconds. Laura did not interrupt. One thing I appreciate about competent leaders is that they know when silence is needed. Finally, I asked the most important question. And if there is a legal risk? Laura answered instantly. We do not want technology tainted by internal sabotage or corporate theatrics. Northbridge follows the law. What you built before is yours. We want you, not a diluted version of you squeezed into someone else's mold. That line made me sit up straight. It was not flattery. It was the understanding of someone who knew the difference between an engineer who builds foundations and one hired to keep them alive. I said I will accept, but I have conditions. I am listening. No harm to end users, no participation in any attack against Harborline, and everything I build must be based on my legal ownership. Laura replied almost immediately, agreed on all of it. Our goal is not to retaliate against Harborline. Our goal is to build something better. If they break their own system, that is not our responsibility. And you are simply protecting what belongs to you. There was a pause, not heavy, just a quiet acknowledgement between two people who understand what a clean strategy looks like. Laura spoke again. I have booked your ticket. Seattle, tonight's flight. The hotel room is ready. We meet tomorrow at 8 in the morning. That fast, I said. Ethan, she replied, her voice light but firm. Talent does not like being kept waiting. And I do not like letting anyone else get to it first. I laughed. For the first time that day. A short, honest sound. After the call ended, I looked around my apartment again. Small, quiet, with walls I rarely noticed. The only thing out of place was the box from the office sitting on the floor. I bent down and lifted it. It felt lighter than I expected. Maybe because everything heavy had been left behind at Harborline. I closed my laptop, slid the quiet debt folder into my bag, and grabbed my coat. The airport was not far. I preferred driving myself, so I reserved a parking spot near O'Hare. On the way, Chicago faded behind the windshield like an old photograph. A city I had given 10 years to suddenly felt smaller, less pressing, less heavy. The plane took off at 9 in the evening. Chicago's lights below looked like a net of gold threads. I did not know if I would return. The only thing I knew was that I needed to leave the place that treated me like a component removable with a single revoke command. Seattle greeted me with a light rain, the steady kind the Pacific Northwest is known for. Not the sharp cold of Chicago, but something that seeped slowly, deeply. I pulled my small suitcase and walked through the terminal. The rain reflected the lights in long streaks across the pavement. This city felt like a new chapter. Dark, damp, but quieter. I checked into the Hotel Northbridge booked. The room was simple and tidy, nothing extra. I set my bag down and walked to the window, looking at the tall buildings blurred by the rain. Part of me felt the loss. 10 years of life is not something you pack into a box and leave behind. But another part of me felt lighter. Like unstrapping armor I had worn too long. I whispered to myself, barely louder than a breath. Harborline erased my name from their system. Northbridge carved it into their conference room door. Tomorrow I will see how they carve it. On the 40th floor in Manhattan, Riley was getting ready to present the future of payments. And I, in a Seattle lab, was making a cup of black tea and opening the live stream. Seattle that morning carried a light rain. Drops clung to the glass and stretched into long streaks, as if the sky itself was sinking closer to the ground. I sat inside the Northbridge lab, a place lit 24/7, rows of desks stretching out like a runway. Blueprints of the new infrastructure hung on the walls, half-finished diagrams my team and I had been sketching, new rails for the payment world, still on clean white paper, still untouched, still unspoiled by anyone eager for a press headline. It made the morning feel quieter than any morning I had lived through in months. The Harborline livestream started on time. I pushed the screen to the side, breathed in the warm scent of black tea rising from the cup. Even though I had left the old company behind, I still wanted to see what they planned to do with the system they believed belonged to them. Harborline had moved the entire media campaign to New York. Manhattan was always the first choice when people wanted a show of boldness, youth, and a polished luxury future. They rented a studio on a high floor, white lights bouncing off the glass behind Riley, framing the New York skyline like a color-graded poster. The new campaign was called Ripple Gen Core. The slogan glowed beneath the logo, payments designed by Generation Z. I took a sip of tea, warmth sliding down my chest. A stylish slogan, sure, but beneath that glossy surface was something built almost a decade ago. Riley stepped onto the stage. She wore a broad-shouldered white suit, the kind young professionals use when they want to look more like leaders. Hair tied high, voice full of confidence. I did not underestimate her. Confidence is a skill, but confidence is not competence. Right in the opening line, she called Caldera an old dinosaur. A soft wave of laughter rippled through the audience. Young people love the idea of tearing down something big, even when they do not understand what it is. She gestured toward the screen behind her. The first slide appeared. I tilted my head, studying each line. The data tables, the input fields, the regional processing model, and even the logic diagrams. All familiar to the point of strangeness. Not inspired, not adapted, lifted. Ripple Gen Core was nothing more than Caldera with new fonts, new colors, and a new name. The core design remained exactly the same. I pulled up the white paper I wrote in the year 2019. Their description matched it line for line, down to the punctuation. It did not make me angry. It felt like seeing a painting I created with someone else's signature on it, displayed proudly at an exhibition. I was about to close the live stream to rest my eyes when an email pinged on my laptop. No subject. The sender anonymized into a string of characters. The body held only 6 words. Thought. You should see this. Below it was an attachment. I opened the file. A scanned copyright registration for Ripple Gen Core. Registered owner, Riley Holloway. The description. Almost entirely copied from my white paper. Word for word. Structure untouched. Only the system name changed. Not an accident. Not a mistake. Deliberate. I did not know who sent it. But the way the file was attached, the bluntness of the message, the absence of unnecessary emotion, told me it was someone inside Harborline. Possibly someone who once worked with me. Possibly someone who had seen things in the new team they could not accept. Those people were rare, but not non-existent. I reopened the live stream. The demo was about to begin. Riley held a remote, her face full of confidence. She said a line I knew too well. And now let us see how Ripple Gen Core predicts real-time transaction shifts. She pressed the button. The screen behind her lit up with the first dashboard. Then it stuttered, then froze. In the tech world, a 1-second lag can be nothing. But in a payment demo streamed internationally, 1 second feels like the entire building is holding its breath. She pressed again. The screen flickered. Charts refused to load. Data fields jumped unpredictably. A few corrupted characters flashed across the top, the kind that appear when a validation layer has been gutted. I was not surprised. The wrist checks they removed were exactly the checks that kept the system stable under demo load, the ones they dismissed as legacy. Old relics. The live stream camera cut to Martin backstage, jaw clenched tight like a string pulled past its limit. He was speaking to the IT team, pointing sharply at a laptop. Even without a clear mic feed, I could hear the irritation in his voice. A young engineer tried to explain, but he was cut off repeatedly. I recognized a few of them. They had worked under me. They knew better than to run a demo without the checks. But I also knew what they feared, losing their jobs. When a company values speed over accuracy, most people learn to bow their heads. Riley returned to the stage, visibly shaken but forcing a rigid smile. She leaned toward the IT team and whispered, "Cut all legacy checks. We need a clean show." Clean was their favorite word. Clean meant no warnings, no safeguards, no protective logic. Clean the way removing a tumor makes an x-ray look perfect, even while the patient dies. I watched her for a moment the way you watch someone walking across thin ice, unaware of the deep water beneath their feet. The IT team complied. The demo restarted. This time there were no errors. But anyone with expertise could see the truth. The charts were preloaded, not real-time. Cosmetic. I said nothing, did not sigh, did not feel anger. I simply reopened the anonymous email, downloaded the copyright registration, and saved the barcode confirmation from the intellectual property office. I placed them in the quiet debt folder, beside the legal documents from the year 2017. They were building a castle out of sand, and the tide always keeps its schedule. I did not follow the news right after Harborline's $980 million collapse. There was no need. What happens afterward always follows the same familiar pattern. The media looks for someone to interview. The board looks for someone to blame. And tech companies look for someone to save them from the mess they created themselves. This time was no different. 3 days after the Ripple Gen crisis, I received a message from a former Harborline engineer. 4 words. Turn on the TV. I opened a news tab. And just as expected, Riley was sitting on a major New York talk show. She wore a pale blue suit jacket. Her posture was nothing like the confidence she had on Go Live Day. Her eyes were slightly swollen, the makeup heavier than usual to cover nights without sleep. The host asked, "Riley, what happened with Ripple Gen Core?" She inhaled, a small tremor slipping through her voice. The kind people only familiar with stages can recognize. "The system was attacked," she said. "We suspect outside sabotage." She did not name my name. She did not need to. Everything she said pointed directly toward the shadow she wanted people to see. I watched her face carefully. Not the confidence of someone who believes she is right. The tension of someone holding herself together in front of cameras. The host asked, "Was Ethan Cole, former infrastructure architect at Harborline, involved?" In that moment, Riley froze. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then she answered in a voice rehearsed for crisis, "I cannot provide details, but we believe the actions caused severe harm to the financial system and end users." I leaned back in my chair, listening to the familiar phrase, end users. The same people they ignored when they deleted the risk checks. The people they exposed by running a fake data demo. The people they never put first. I was not angry. I simply saw a truth laid bare. When cornered, people often draw their enemy using the outline of their own mistakes. The interview ended with half-hearted applause. I closed the tab. Nothing new. Nothing is worth spending emotion on. Meanwhile, inside Harborline, a completely different battle had begun. On Wednesday morning, an internal email was leaked. It showed that the board no longer trusted the executive team. Martin Holloway was ordered to explain to the full board why he fired me without confirming the legal status of Caldera's ownership. Then came the minutes from an emergency meeting. The version I received from an anonymous source included the critical line. The risk checks were removed, not for the demo. They were removed to hide an architectural flaw that the new team could not fix. I read it several times, not because I was shocked, but because of a quiet, tired sadness. The thing I built years ago to protect people had been tossed aside because it did not look flashy enough on a stage. Later that afternoon, a video surfaced showing Martin leaving headquarters. No reporters, no escort. Just a man who had aged several years in a single week. Walking out the back door. I felt no satisfaction. Just the inevitable consequence for someone who made decisions without understanding the ground beneath him. That night, Laura called. "Ethan," she said, "Harborline just contacted Northbridge. They want an emergency negotiation." I asked, "About what?" Laura remained steady, calm. "They want to buy our new architecture or negotiate temporary cooperation to keep their system from collapsing." I leaned back, looking at the web of new diagrams on my screen. Clean rails, a system built without patches, something I believed would outlast any marketing campaign. "How much are they offering?" I asked. Laura laughed softly. "Ethan, you are asking the wrong person. They are not in a position to offer anything. They are only in a position to plead." That answer eased something deep inside me. Northbridge did not bend because Harborline was falling apart. The next morning, I was invited to the main conference room at Northbridge. When I walked in, all senior leaders were present, including the chief executive officer, a sharp woman whose eyes seemed able to read intention in a single sentence. On the table was a thin folder, not the thick contract Harborline once shoved at me. The CEO slid the folder toward me. We want to formalize your leadership over the architecture of our new payment platform. Not temporary, not project-based, permanent. I opened the document. A clear proposal. Full technical authority, independent budget. And the part I examined most carefully. Real equity, not the decorative kind. The CEO added, "The board has voted. You are no longer the man fired by Harborline. You are the one setting a new standard they now have to learn from." I stayed quiet, not to appear noble, but because the moment carried a strange taste. Not victory, not revenge. A quiet confirmation earned over a long road. I signed. No ceremony, no glass of whiskey. Just one decisive line linking the past to the future. As I left the room, Laura walked beside me. She said softly, "Harborline will announce the cause of the system collapse in 2 days. They cannot and not hide the deleted risk checks. Soon enough, everything will be clear." I nodded. I did not need their apology. I did not need their admission. Truth does not require acknowledgement to be true. That afternoon, I reopened my laptop and continued writing the core of the new architecture. The Seattle sky was a soft gray, rain tapping steadily against the window. I felt a kind of quiet I had not known in years. For the first time, I worked without worrying that someone would steal my work to decorate a presentation. For the first time in a long time, everything felt like it was returning to its rightful place. I had not sabotaged anyone. I had not collapsed their system. I had simply allowed things to stop exactly when they needed to stop and let the truth take its own path. And this time, I was working with a team that respected the people who built foundations. No one is climbing on someone else's shoulders to look good on camera. No one is ripping out safety just to make a chart move faster. A quiet that finally made sense. A beginning at the right moment. Seattle kept raining, and I kept writing the future. On the day they laughed in my face, I understood two things. They had never read the contract, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I walked out of the 16th floor to a cardboard box in my arms, while Jordan, the man who believed pastel color palettes were a strategy, watched me with the smug certainty of someone who had never fought a real battle. But I wasn't angry. They thought the story was over. I knew the game had only begun. 9 years earlier, Sentry Shield, the security system I wrote in a cramped South End apartment, stopped a coordinated attack on an entire hospital chain. That story spread fast, and Mega Shield showed up. They wanted to rebrand. I only wanted to protect the soul of the product. When I signed the acquisition for a symbolic $10, they didn't notice the only line that mattered, buried in a section they never bothered to read. Clause 9.2.4. If I were ever terminated without legitimate cause, the original IP would return to me automatically for $10. After the deal, Mega Shield started turning Sentry Shield into a pastel ornament. Jordan, the VP of marketing, changed red alerts to soft blue so users would feel less stressed. Marlon, the CFO, demanded they cut 30% of the security checks to save costs. They pushed out seasoned engineers, simplified critical functions, and weakened the architecture out of pure, dangerous confidence. I stopped arguing. People who were busy repainting a wall rarely noticed the cracks beneath it. So I watched. And I waited. Eventually, they chose the quietest way to erase me. Locked my Slack, deleted my email, removed my name from the company timeline, and even cleared my desk as if I had never existed. A young engineer, Maria, slipped me the layoff list. My name was at the top. They wanted me gone before the quarterly report. In the Q2 meeting, Jordan unveiled a new dashboard. Ocean blue gradients, smiling emojis, security alerts that looked like sleep tracking prompts. When I pushed back, they said I was holding the company back in the past. I walked out of the room with a single, sharp clarity. They had just activated clause 9.2.4 without knowing it. That afternoon, HR handed me the termination document. Reason, internal restructuring. not legitimate, which meant the clause was now live. I went home, retrieved the silver USB holding the original agreement, and filled out a $10 payment slip. I signed it, sealed it in a FedEx envelope, and sent them the same trap they had signed, blindly, 9 years before. The next morning, MegaShield held an emergency meeting. At first, they mocked the $10 transfer. But Keller, the head of legal, opened the contract, cross-checked all merger records, and found the truth. The legal merger had never been completed. One unsigned form, one submission was never filed, which meant Century Shield Technologies, LLC, still existed and still owned the IP, and by terminating me without cause, they had triggered my automatic buyback right. Grant went pale. Jordan froze. Marlon blamed everyone except himself. HR panicked, but it was too late. One tiny clause, the one they never read, had stripped MegaShield of the system they had bragged about for nearly a decade. 2 days later, the headlines exploded. A major cybersecurity firm was facing scandal over a 9-year-old merger error. Clients demanded proof of IP ownership. Hospitals paused their deployments. MegaShield looked less like a powerhouse and more like a sinking ship. Around that same time, Major General Avery, the man who once told me he signed because of me, not because of them, sent an email with one sentence. "When you are ready to return, we are ready." I rented a small office in Cambridge, nothing fancy, nothing polished, but it had enough light and enough silence to begin again. I carried the silver USB and a cold pizza box into the room. That night, I started rebuilding the core from scratch, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Then people came back. Sam, who refused to sit on a ship that was already taking on water. Asha, who couldn't watch them destroy our system for the sake of pastel colors. Tom, a veteran engineer who left because it wasn't security anymore. Maria, the youngest, but the first to recognize the danger and how MegaShield operated. 6 people, 4 old laptops, 1 folding table, too much coffee, and the same quiet anger pulsing under every keystroke. We restored every part of Century Shield they had broken. The red alerts, the 0.8-second response time, the backbone logic they never understood. On day 4, a finance company from Dallas called. "If you relaunch Century Shield, we'll sign with you." Day 5, a Seattle hospital asked when they could migrate back. Day 7, 3 more enterprise clients reached out. The press picked it up. The $10 founder returns. I wasn't angry at MegaShield anymore. My job wasn't revenge. My job was fixing what they broke. In October, I stood on the biased stage of the Federal Security Conference in Washington, D.C., not to pitch a product, but to tell the story of an engineer pushed out of the very thing he created, and how he reclaimed it with one line in a contract. The room rose to its feet when I held up the framed $10 transfer slip. Not for victory, for survival. As I stepped off the stage, Mason texted me. "The old board just resigned. Their lawsuit was dismissed. It's over." I looked up at the DC sky, the kind of blue no one can turn pastel, and understood something simple. I didn't come back to retaliate. I came back to do what Century Shield was built to do. And if you've ever been underestimated, ever watched someone assume they're smarter than they are, ever been pushed out of the thing you built, remember this. Reading the contract isn't paranoia, it's survival. 1 year later, I stood in front of the same building in Chicago. The turnstiles were still there, but the name on the front was not. The steel plaque that once read Harbor Line Technologies and sat on the granite wall was gone. In its place was a new line of brushed metal, glowing softly under the morning sun. Northbridge Harbor Campus. Same building, same location, but an entirely different soul. Harbor Line's infrastructure division had been sold to Northbridge 6 months earlier. Everything else, marketing, PR, a few non-core departments, had been carved off and absorbed into smaller companies. A former empire, convinced it was too big to fall, now lived only as a footnote in a financial report. I stood in the lobby for a moment, feeling Chicago colder than I remembered. A security guard walked over, not aggressive, not suspicious, just doing his job. "Your badge, please." I almost laughed. The last time I stood here, a girl had walked through the turnstile like it was her living room. No badge, no check, no rules of any kind. This time I handed over my badge without a second thought. The guard looked at the name printed on it. His eyes brightened slightly, then he nodded. Welcome back, McCall. It wasn't ceremonial. It felt like a greeting from someone who understood that I belonged here in a way the old logo never acknowledged. The turnstile unlocked with that familiar beep, this time marking me entering, not leaving. The lobby had been redesigned. Northbridge's deep blue palette replaced the washed-out gray of the past. Large screens lined the walls, displaying the architecture of Aurora Rail, the new payment rail my team and I had built with clean syntax, precise logic, and airtight legal ownership. Then I saw it. To the right of the reception, mounted on a glass wall, was a black and white photograph. Not a stage portrait, not a glossy marketing shot, a candid moment from a technical session in Seattle. I was standing at the digital board, pointing at a logic branch, mid-sentence, hair slightly messy after 13 hours of work. Beneath the frame, etched in steel, were the words Ethan Cole, the man who refused to sign away his mind. I didn't stare at it long. I'm not the type to admire my own picture on a wall, but I did acknowledge one thing: someone in this building understood the value of a well-timed refusal. I stepped into the elevator. The feeling was strange. A year earlier, I had gone down this same elevator, carrying a small cardboard box, wondering if 10 years of my life were really contained inside it. Now I was going up, carrying nothing but a document to sign and a sense of ownership no one could strip away again. The elevator stopped on the 23rd floor. The doors opened to a new hallway, frosted glass walls, warm lights, quiet movement. No sterility, no tension. There was life here. There was alignment. My office sat at the end of the hall, positioned so I could see both the city and the entire floor. The nameplate on the door read, Ethan Cole, Chief Architect, Aurora Rail, no slogans, no ornaments, no unnecessary flourish, just the truth. I walked in. The desk was clean, the chair simple, the window overlooking the Chicago River flowing quietly between the towers. Nothing extravagant, nothing meant to impress, just what I needed. A small object sat on the desk, a metal pen, heavy, matte steel. A short engraving ran along its side. Something I knew instantly came from Laura, someone on the engineering team. To those who build the rails quietly. I picked it up. It was cold, but comfortably warm, not like the commemorative pen they gave me during my 15th anniversary at Harborline, the one I kept even after they erased everything else. This pen wasn't a souvenir. It was a tool. I opened the folder waiting on my desk. The patent for Aurora Rail. Not a draft, not a prototype. The actual approved application, missing only my signature. My name stood at the top of the inventor list, not buried under a marketing director, not swapped out for someone who stood well on camera, not tied to a forced IP transfer. I set the pen down on the signature line. No hesitation, no internal debate. I signed. A simple signature, but clean, like the system I built. As the ink dried, I leaned back and let Chicago's morning light hit the desk. A part of me remembered walking out of this building in silence, without a farewell, without anyone meeting my eyes. But the rest of me didn't care anymore. They had fired a name on the payroll. They forgot about the mind that laid the tracks. And this time I made sure that my mind had a place of its own.